Thanks very much, Reece, fellow Old Green. Very prestigious club, Victoria University. A number of people in this room, I'm sure, would agree with me, not the least of which would be Roger Drummond. President Lee and your fellow Rotarians and guests, thank you very much for having me along to say a few words. I think when I was initially invited, it seemed like a good idea. I saw my diary yesterday and I thought that wasn't such a good idea. But then I realised I was going to get lunch, so it was back being a good idea again. I think when I was initially asked, I was supposed to talk about some humorous moments from inside New Zealand rugby, but as is I think right when we were asked to speak, I completely changed the topic because actually it's more important when you get an opportunity to speak to a group of particularly experienced business people that this group is and highly successful over a long period of time. If you think about what's going on in this room, I think it's useful to offer a broader, more meaningful insight into how our game is currently structured and shaped and where we're at and some of the challenges that are before us. I'm just about completely exhausted though because your esteemed president's from Taranaki and told me that she knows us significantly more about rugby than I do, and so it's actually been quite a difficult half an hour having my lunch. But there you go, she's enjoying being a part of the Chiefs. Perhaps before I start though, what I might do is I'd just like to acknowledge what's going on around New Zealand at the moment in regards to the Cricket World Cup. I think once again as a country we're getting an opportunity to showcase what's good about this magnificent country we live in. The people that are doing the job. Therese Walsh was also heavily involved with Rugby World Cup. I think a number of you will know Therese. She's an outstanding young businesswoman and doing a great job. So just like to acknowledge that and hope that they continue to have some luck on their side. Clearly, if you waited 40 minutes for a pie on Saturday or Friday night at Westpac Stadium, you won't be too happy, and that is something we do need to get right, because if there was one thing that worried us actually prior to Rugby World Cup, there was a number of things, but one thing that was definitely on our radar was the standard of our service and catering at stadia, and to have people finally get 35,000 people back to this particular venue and then not to have a good experience is frankly bloody disappointing. So, but putting that to one side, they're obviously doing a very good job, and the Black Caps I think are going outstandingly well, although they would be, I think, well advised not to read too many New Zealand newspapers over the next few days, because if you read that you'd think we'd already won the tournament and we clearly haven't, and I'd say that there'll be an Australian cricket team lapping that up as we speak. So good luck to Brendan and his guys. I think great opportunity to play at home. It's very significant to go to a pinnacle event in your own country, and in New Zealand we get very few opportunities to do that in many codes, so a great time for them. So what, just coming back to our organisation, what I'm going to talk to you today I suspect will not surprise any of you. There are no magic secrets in where we are at right now. Some people think we're doing okay, others will give you a different view, and that's absolutely fine. But from our point of view, what I'd like to share today is just some of the critical things that underpin what we've done over the last sort of 6 to 10 years in getting our organisation to a point where we think it is performing at a high level. We can always get better for sure, and we are challenged every day to do that. But there's just some things, some insights that most of you will be, I'm sure, incredibly aware of. Reece mentioned inspiring and unifying New Zealanders, so we have a stated vision to do just that. It's quite a lofty thing to say, and when we first thought about that, I personally was a little bit nervous. How do you inspire and unify a whole nation when you're just a sport? But the reality of rugby in this country is that you do have an opportunity to do that. We are still, I think, arguably the public-facing brand of New Zealand. It's the most recognised New Zealand brand outside this country, and we've had plenty of examples of how we can help New Zealand benefit from that, and I'll maybe talk about Chicago a little bit later on. But at the same time, we're still a sport that binds communities, and we're still a sport that's really relevant throughout this country, and we've again seen that happen at times of adversity. I remember with very clear precision the day we went over to the West Coast after the Pike River disaster, after we came back from the Northern Tour, and went to the Blaketown Rugby Club with a couple of players and Graham Henry, and I think that club had 2 or 3 boys who are still down there, obviously, and what it meant to those families in that community to have our guys turn up and just share their grief, and that was really important. We saw it around the Crusaders. I guess poignant, isn't it, that 4 years on from Christchurch, the way that team rallied around and ended up being able to represent that region for a whole season without having a home ground was something quite remarkable, and was a really important part, I think, of that immediate healing process. So there are enormous opportunities for us as a game if you think about a global presence and you think about a relevance to the community. But we don't take any of that for granted. We would be very foolish to do so. So we're working hard. We have a robust planning process. We've got a strategy. It's published. I'll run you through a little bit of that. We put our proverbials on the line every year and say this is what we're going to achieve, and if we don't, we score ourselves accordingly. Backing up that plan, and this bit surprises some people, we have what we call a balanced scorecard. So a lot of people will say to me when we get to the Christmas holidays, well, you've had a good year because the All Blacks have won everything again, and I say, yep, but actually for us as an organisation, it's only a very small part of what we measure in any given year. So everyone who works in our place has an element of their income at risk. They've got a bonus. That's what we used to call them. And that bonus is applied by measuring a scorecard across the game. So I think last year the All Black performance was worth 15% of that scorecard. Community rugby numbers was worth 20%. Broadcast negotiations, which were huge for the future, were 25%. So each year we'll revise that. Clearly there's an event coming up in London, and for us, Cardiff, Newcastle, and the Cardiff, London, and Newcastle. That's it. Hopefully London. Actually, if we don't get past the quarter-final, we won't play in London again, which will be just a little bit annoying. But that will occupy a bigger percentage this year because clearly the World Cup's a bigger event than a normal All Black program. Behind all of that, in the end, and this is going to be a critical thing, again, it won't surprise anyone, but I always re-emphasise that none of this is possible without really, really good people, and having the right people sitting in the right seat in the bus is absolutely critical. And any organisation that doesn't front the people issues full on won't be successful over a sustained period of time. So I can continue to reiterate that no matter whether the audience is experienced and been around for a long time, or whether I'm talking to young kids at a school. If you put the wrong people in the seat, then you ain't going to go anywhere, and it's no more evident in a team sport, but it also applies to all organisations. We, of course, have an interesting set of stakeholders. 4.5 million live in New Zealand, another big chunk all around the world. We have 5 million people currently watching us on various social media websites. I've done a quick look around the room. I don't think we've counted any of you in that 5 million, but that might be a bit harsh. But just to give you some sense of how the world changes, we do now need to be dealing with teenagers that actually get their news via something that vibrates on their phone and has to be all over in 3 seconds or they ain't going to listen to it. So that's a big change for all of us. We obviously have a real shareholding of 26 provincial unions, and they vary in size from East Coast, West Coast, with a couple of hundred players, to Auckland now with over 25,000. So again, a very varied shareholder group. And whenever we try and work our way through a challenge, or we want to review something in our game, we get a variety of views that are impossible to pull together into a complete consensus. So actually one of the things we're criticised of is that our consultation is a bit for show, and that you were never going to do what we told you. Well, the problem is we always get 26 different answers, and you have to pick something eventually to go and do. That's called leadership and decision making. So we have that challenge. Our competitors increasingly have an enormously huge resource advantage. If you think about England, who are probably at the peak of that challenge, they sit on a facility that now generates something like £20 million whenever they play there. They've got over 450,000 senior players. We have about 20,000. So you can think about if they actually ever get their act completely together, it's going to, well, hopefully they won't, but that's why Wayne Smith's never allowed to go and coach England. But the reality is that's the environment we we work in, and we are going to have to continue to be incredibly innovative, very nimble, and be really smart about what we do. Like any business that's trying to work outside of New Zealand from here. Huge advantages living in this country, enormous opportunity to be innovative because we're small and we can be quick, but ultimately we do face a big challenge when we look at our competitors. Give you some sense of scale now, we've got 100 full-time equivalent people working Wellington and Auckland, and some scattered around the country. But we have about 450 on the payroll, so if you think of all the professional players and coaches, then we are up to about 450 people whose families we feed every week. We're now a $120 million business. We are growing, we are putting a bit more juice in the tank, but constantly under pressure, particularly to retain our talent, to have more money to spend. So, as I said, clear vision, strong plan, a ruthless commitment to review. So we are very, very hard on ourselves. We are adamant that you cannot sit and be comfortable, and when you do miss a beat, and we were just talking about the Sevens tournament here in Wellington, and I think it's fair to say we have to take some share of the responsibility for missing the moment. We have let that tournament go through a cycle, and we haven't picked we haven't read the tea leaves. It's really difficult with tea bags, but quite rightfully, we now have to sit back and take a very hard look at what we're going to do to get that tournament back to where it should be, because clearly having a half-full stadium is not going to sustain itself here long term. So constantly looking at review, as I said before, a real commitment to innovation. A lot of people talk about innovation, but a lot of people are really scared about what change means, and that's what innovation is. It means doing something different than the way you did it yesterday. And if we always talk about getting up, I personally get up every morning and you've got to really deliberately say, how can I do my job better today than I did it yesterday? Otherwise there's no point in me going back there, someone else should have a crack. And that means you've got to keep pushing, keep changing, keep looking at different things. And we've done that across a range of things. And when you're the custodians of a legacy for something, just think about the jersey, for example. Some of the innovations that we've brought to the fit, to the way the texture of the material is used. Recently, I can't come to grips with it. We've got backs that look like forwards, so it's probably difficult to know who you're allowed to pass to nowadays. But because, of course, in my day we never passed to a back. But well, it was true. They never passed to us either. But so always looking to find a competitive edge, which means you have to be prepared to take a risk. And so you might remember. We put the lightest, it's always the lightest and strongest jersey of all time out, and for the first 3 or 4 games a whole lot of jerseys ripped. Well, that's what happens when you're pushing the technological edge. You can't get to that very fine point where it gives you some advantage, and God knows what that advantage is with a jersey, frankly, but apparently it's one. So you're going to have to get to the point where you're prepared to have a failure and have some people be critical of it. So as I said, for me, the critical ingredient, once you've got a plan, you've got an agreed vision, you've got a process where you are pushing the boundaries and you're prepared to be really hard on yourself and your results, the critical ingredient, I just come back to it, is it's about those people. So we have a saying in New Zealand, I hope you're all familiar with it, hei tangata, hei tangata, hei tangata. I just repeat it once again, it is the people. And if you think we're doing okay at the moment, I would suggest it's because we've had the very best people in some very critical positions. So through till last World Cup with Graham and Steve and Wayne at the head, with an exceptional individual in Richie McCaw. And since the World Cup, I think since we kicked off against Tonga in that opening match, we're currently batting something like 93% success at an international level. So this is a sport where everyone wants to beat us. No question about that too. So to be winning 99.3 out of 10 games, I don't know how that works. Someone will be here, will be an economist. No Kopi, is there? No. But that's where it sits. That's what this group of people are doing. And we've been, I think, very fortunate in having, particularly in Richie, a leader both on and off the field who's prepared to commit to all the things that we do as an organisation and continue to push himself to be the best he can be every day. And he leads by example. But behind that, we've had a great group. And if you look at the All Black bus and you talk about the bus, the seat, people in the right seat in the bus, I am privileged enough to get on that bus occasionally. You don't do it too often because it's not my role, but occasionally I'm I'm invited to be on the bus, and I look back there and I just see the wealth of experience and know the characters of the people sitting in those seats and feel a huge degree of comfort. But it will be challenging. We're going to lose a lot of those men come end of this year, and we've worked hard to ensure a relatively smooth transition. I'm not one that believes in rebuilding. I think that's a cop-out. But in the end, when you've got a seriously experienced group we have, I mean, when we went into the World Cup in 2011, we had no Centurions. No one had played 100 tests for the All Blacks. We could currently pick 5 to play a test match today if they chose them all to be the best in their position. So by the time we get to Wembley and play Argentina in the opening game of this Cup, Ma will be sitting there on, potentially if he's selected obviously, on 90 odd. Conrad will be sitting on 80 odd. So you add that to Richard, Kevy, Woody, Desi if he makes it, and an enormously experienced group of All Blacks on the paddock. But they're all likely to finish, unfortunately, at the same time. And so that is going to be challenging for us. So the reappointment of Steve, some said brave decision, controversial, appointing the coach before the World Cup. Well, frankly, that's bollocks. You've got the best coach in the world, interested in going around again. It's just a no-brainer. You get on and make that decision. And he now can help us plan for that transition much better than we have in the past. I mentioned before Chicago. We might just dwell on that a little bit because, again, a lot of people said we did that just to appease some sort of commercial agenda. Incorrect. It did help, no question, with AIG. It was an enormously successful week from that point of view. But the reality was that Steve wanted a game that would mirror the World Cup. So to come back to what we face in the UK in September, we play Argentina at the opening match. That's going to be a very difficult test match. We won't have played for 5 weeks, nor will have they. But we're not great when we're rusty. That will be a very important test, and it will not be easy. Sold out, Wembley, 85,000 people. We then play Namibia, Georgia and Tonga, who frankly will not test us to the same level. And then the following week we will go to Cardiff and play one of, ironically, France or Ireland, both of whom are very capable of going through and playing in the final of this World Cup. So if we can't get our heads around that, we'll be in trouble. So Steve wanted to, in a way, emulate that. He wanted to go and have a soft game on the way to playing to playing France the year before last. So we went to Japan, then went to Paris the following Saturday, had to play the French. Last year we went to the US, did a whole lot of other stuff which was fantastic, but we had a soft game in reality, and then whack, Twickenham, England. No harder test, I don't think, for an international rugby side. So we try to give us some sort of emulant, to try to replicate what the World Cup will look like in doing that. The rest of Chicago was fantastic. One of the things that's really interesting is how many, I think we had the largest gathering of expat Kiwis in the US ever. Mike Moore, who's the ambassador up there, said he'd never seen so many people in one American city before who came from New Zealand. What we did have is we had about 70 companies leverage off New Zealand Trade and Enterprise up there selling their wares to the UK, so which is fantastic, and again just reflects the strength of the All Black brand and what it will do to give us a platform to sell in New Zealand. What it did for us, of course, is it reinforced a little bit of a challenge, and of those 70 companies, none had actually paid any money to New Zealand Rugby to be involved in our brand, where we've got a whole lot of loyal partners who spend a lot of money over a long period of time. So one of the challenges for us is how do we find the balance of being a good corporate citizen, and one of my meetings this afternoon is with the new sports minister where we'll have this conversation, versus not underselling, if you like, our commercial strength, and our reality is there is a value placed on being associated with our teams. But that's a problem. That's a good problem to have. It's an opportunity, and the government is very aware of it. And we've actually just done a deal with Trade and Enterprise to make that work for us in London. I mentioned AIG in passing. Often comes up in questions. It's been a fantastic partnership for us. It was a big call to place another mark on the jersey. There was already one there. Adidas had paid a lot of money for the jersey to be effectively blank with just them on it. In fact, they paid more. We were getting more from Adidas than most countries get from their apparel and their naming right sponsor. But we had need for some more funds, so we went back to our friends in Germany and said, would you contemplate a change in approach? And they were, as they tend to be, accommodating but demanding, and we found a win-win solution. And then, unfortunately, AIG came about. Big difference dealing with, they've got 65,000 employees based in New York, completely different culture. But so far, it's been a fantastic relationship. And again, I just come back to the common theme. Actually, it's been about the people relationships that we've formed. We've got to know them really well. They've committed a lot of time come to a lot of our events, have to travel to do so, and we spend a lot of time doing the opposite. In fact, I'm going back up to New York in a couple of weeks just to go to their winter summit, which unfortunately is in a ski field, so these are the things you've got to do for your country. Apparently it's very icy and quite cold, and I won't enjoy it. So I think I'm very happy to answer some questions. I guess just to acknowledge that we have a very big year in 2015. It's not just about the Rugby World Cup for us. We still have some real challenges, and while we are, we're comfortable that we're doing a lot of things right. Last year wasn't by no means perfect. Our Black Ferns didn't perform at the World Cup, and we finished 5th, and that's clearly not acceptable to us. And they've won the last 4 World Cups, so to have that slip up and that magnitude of slip up is not good enough. We've struggled to get an under-20 team to be competitive. We are definitely not resting on our laurels given some results. The Sevens team didn't win a gold medal at the Commonwealth Games. Most countries would be pretty happy to be on the dais getting a silver, but it's not good enough for us. So, for example, all of our staff missed that part of their target on their bonus because we didn't get a bonus for coming second, we get a bonus for coming first. On the medium-term horizon, Rio is an enormous opportunity for rugby generally to go into the Olympic program, greatest sporting stage in the world, no question, no matter where you come from. The Olympics are the pinnacle. So for rugby to be there again is fantastic, and I think it'll be an outstandingly successful tournament, played over 6 days, 3 days of women, 3 days of men. But we are reviewed, and the new president, Thomas Bach of the IOC, is looking at the whole program. It's going to be quite challenging for everybody, I think. We need rugby to have a very successful time at Rio so that we can stay in that Olympic program, because it's giving us opportunities. I mean, it's more of a challenge for us, frankly, in New Zealand than it is an opportunity. But in those markets where rugby isn't strong and where we want to get a foothold, Sevens just gives us a much easier entry point. And to be an Olympic sport just clicks a whole lot of buttons that nothing else does. So we're looking at Rio, and then in 2017 we get the British and Irish Lions back to New Zealand. There's a bit of publicity already about who they'll play, where they won't play. It'll be as big as it was in 05, probably seriously bigger. In fact, one of the things we're currently struggling with is that a number of hotels have already booked out all their rooms for the window where they think the tour is going to be held, and we haven't actually announced any dates yet, nor have we secured accommodation for the team. So we're going to have to go back to the Hotel Association and say, whoa, pull the pony back a little way. And then, of course, the prices will all go up, but you're all familiar with that. So lots going on, lots in front of us, lots of opportunity. And I guess the one thing to reiterate finally is that we don't in any way take for granted the support we get from our commercial partners in this country, but most importantly from our fans. And while we probably, you won't be playing at 10. Maybe the hospitality industry should talk to the teachers about. So just to finally finish, the one thing we definitely don't take for granted is that kids want to play a game and that people want to support rugby. We have definitely got some things in front of us that are making that more and more difficult. Concussion is really high on our agenda. On Friday there was quite a big meeting, ironically, around the formation of our own policy on illicit drugs, because actually right now we don't have a policy on illicit drugs. And then of course the story broke over the weekend about the cocaine use in the NRL. So if you think we're immune to any of that sort of stuff, then they're obviously very foolish. We've got a lot of challenges that come with any organisation that deals with a cohort of young people, be they male or female. So thanks very much for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions. Lee, shall I take some? Or one. From you? No. I wouldn't dare. So happy to answer one question. Roger, you can ask this at home. We don't live with them, sorry. Someone else. Well, he's asked about 40 different questions. We've got about 15 projects that would... I think, in short, Roger, there's a number of really important things that are going on in society that are difficult for us. We can't control. The way our content is delivered. For example, I was down watching one of my children row on the weekend, and there was no Sky in Twizel, but I could watch actually fortunately it was a short innings because I was watching it on 3G, so my IT boy will be giving me a hard time about my data usage, probably get abused of something else, but I was able to watch the Cricket World Cup game live on my iPad, sitting in a very remote location in New Zealand, just through the 3G network. My kids watch 3 or 4 things at once and don't concentrate on any of them. But that's what they do. So there's all that going on. Again, going down to Central Otago just reinforced for me how much our land use in this country has changed. So if you're thinking about rural communities and where rugby clubs should be and where provinces we've probably got more provinces than banks on the west coast. I mean, but there are some historical things that are just very, very difficult to force change on, and you're better to let that evolve naturally. But if you look at what irrigation has done to the South Island, and the land use change from a very extensive pasture farming where everybody could organise their lives around a rugby training and a rugby game, dairy farming doesn't give you that opportunity. Viticulture doesn't give you that opportunity. When the grapes have got to come off, they've got to come off. There's no time for rugby practice. So land use has been an enormous influence on what happens in local communities in rural New Zealand. And, we just have to adapt or get left behind. And how we get people to live events when TV's so good is a bloody challenge.